We're so happy to be joined now by Ryan Grim. You may have heard of him. Ryan, thank you for joining us. I know you have a quarantine zone in your house right now, so we appreciate it.
It is quite something. Yeah, I was just as I was just mentioning, you haven't really lived until, your wife's getting chemo and two of your kids get flu right before that. Like, oh, okay. This is gonna be a tight wire act. So yeah, she's not even in the house. She went to a friend's house after getting it.
Truly father of the year. There's no competition.
Well, there's fewer people in the house now, so
the silver lining is the rest of life is going to seem really easy after this.
That's right.
You're going to be like, I can't believe that this was like a problem before. Yeah.
Just coasting downhill from here.
Great point. Well, let's start because we wanted to have you come and talk to us about some updates in this incredibly important case of Mahmoud Khalil. But let's start with Saagar's question at the White House briefing yesterday. Saagar was able to get one question in about this situation, so we can go ahead and roll E1 here. Saagar at yesterday's White House press briefing talking to Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
Does the administration believe that it needs to charge a green card holder with a crime to be eligible for deportation?
Well, in fact, Secretary Rubio reserves the right to revoke the visa of Mahmoud Khalil, and I'm glad you brought this up. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the Secretary of State has the right to revoke a green card or a visa for individuals who serve or are adversarial to the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States of America. And Mahmoud Khalil was an individual who was given the privilege of coming to this country to study at one of our nation's finest universities and colleges. And he took advantage of that opportunity, of that privilege, by siding with terrorists, Hamas terrorists who have killed innocent men, women, and children. This is an individual who organized group protests that not only disrupted college campus classes and harassed Jewish American students and made them feel unsafe on their own college campus, but also distributed pro-Hamas propaganda.
So the legal question here is actually really interesting. There is I would say, overly broad law that the administration is citing that does allow the Secretary of State to exercise discretion here. And the administration confirmed, actually to the Free Press a couple of days ago now, that this is not because Khalil broke any law. They're very much not arguing that he broke any law. They're arguing that they have the discretion to toss people, legal permanent residents, out of the country if they are essentially violating or they're undermining America's national security by protesting and doing other sort of acts like that. So Ryan, just give us your reaction to Leavitt's answer in the context of everything we've seen. Fairly messy sort of attempt to explain all of this from the administration.
Yeah, and I'm glad Saagar pinned her down on that, because now we understand that the administration is, like you said, making the claim that they don't need to charge a green card holder. And there are probably a lot of green card holders. That means you're a lawful permanent resident. You're on the pathway to citizenship next. And next you take your test if you want to. That if you're in that status, lawful permanent resident, that Rubio can kick you out without any due process, without charging you with a crime, without even an administrative process kind of inside of the State Department, that if he decides that you are a threat to national security, he can get rid of you. The argument that they are making is that combating anti-Semitism is a foreign policy priority of the United States, and that having somebody who's anti-Semitic in the United States undermines the U.S. ability to pursue its fight against anti-Semitism. So you could also imagine if Democrats said that, as they did, that climate change is a national security threat and that foreign policy is organized around combating climate change, that anybody who's here, who's a permanent resident, who doesn't approve of the Biden administration's climate policy is therefore a threat to climate policy.
Or protests it and hands out anti-climate denying posters, whatever it is, yeah.
Or if they said that, look, January 6th was an insurrection and the Proud Boys are domestic terrorists, and that then anybody who says anything about the 2020 election is therefore supporting domestic terrorists, and if they're a permanent resident, then they can be expelled. You're right that there is this law in the books that could be read to grant the Secretary of State this authority. We've been around for 250 years. That history has been dark at times. There are an awful lot of ugly laws and draconian laws on our books that we understand today are in complete and obvious conflict with the Constitution. And this is one of them. So we'll see, though, whether or not the court ends up agreeing with that. There will be a hearing late this morning between the council and the government.
I mean, you can just imagine the freak out if the shoe was on the other foot, as you're laying out, Ryan. Like, let's say that Biden declared that combating racism, anti-Black racism, was a foreign policy priority. And let's say maybe Elon Musk still was a permanent resident and not a citizen. You're like, white South Africans, sorry, you got to go. Steve Bannon says you're the most racist people on the face of the planet. So that's it for you.
And you've defended these people who say that they are racist. Like that one doggy dog kid who said, like, I was a proud racist before being racist was cool. And they defended him. So, okay, now are you all terrorists because you're all like in contravention of this U.S. policy against racism? Like, that would be absurd. But that's certainly the precedent they're setting up.
So let me go ahead and get your reaction to Trump during his, Tesla sales pitch on the White House lawn situation. Got asked a question about this as well and indicated that Mahmoud Khalil would be the first of many. Let's take a listen to that.
I think we ought to get them all out of the country. They're troublemakers. They're agitators. They don't love our country. We ought to get them the hell out. I think that guy, we ought to get him. I heard his statements, too. They were plenty bad. And I think we ought to get him the hell out of the country.
His statements were plenty bad. So, I mean, just again, this isn't about a crime. This is about things that he said that the administration doesn't like. And this alleged Hamas material, which is so bad, Caroline Levin couldn't even bring it into the briefing room to share with us just how terrible this propaganda he was distributing or affiliated with was. But, there was what seems to have unfolded here, and this is your reporting as well as other outlets, is that when they went to arrest Khalil, they thought he was there on a student visa. And then he and his wife were like, he's a green card, like he's a permanent resident. And they're like, don't care, we're taking him anyway. And so the theory was basically like the administration kind of bungled this and they overreached, went far beyond what they had intended to. But they're certainly not backing away from it. Instead, they're using this as a justification to go even further and say, yeah, that's right. Student visa, green card holder. If we don't want you here, if Secretary Rubio decides that you're an anti-Semite, that's it. You're gone.
Yeah, and what's wild, and we reported this at Drop Site, that Elvin Hernandez was the ICE agent who had the conversation, particularly with Amy Greer, who is Mahmoud Khalil's attorney. Elvin Hernandez was the 2019 guest at the State of the Union of President Trump. Interesting coincidence if it is that. But yes, he told her, we're picking him up because we're revoking his student visa. And she told him he's a permanent resident, he has a green card. And his response, according to the court filing, was, oh, well, we're revoking that too. So yeah, clearly it's like, they call it an audible. And we may end up getting this extraordinary rollback in civil liberties over incompetence, over a failure to just go in their own database and check whether or not he was on a student visa or whether he was on a green card. Because once you're on a green card, you do have more protections than when you're here on a student visa. Student visa, you really, or other kinds of visas, you really can be, sent back out of the country, with very little rationale, or in some cases no rationale at all. But once you're a legal permanent resident, the paperwork is that all green card holders get is very clear. You have to be convicted of a crime to be expelled. They don't mention this like obscure, you're endorsing terrorism thing. But by the way, one detail on that Hamas propaganda that they said he was distributing, we don't actually know if he was handing it out or if it was being handed out in the same building where he was. But aside from that, the law on this, as it's been decided by courts, has always been that it's actually okay to support illegal things, support terrorism. Even, you can support drug trafficking, whatever, as long as you're doing it as speech independently of the criminal activity. And so, like, to take the most extreme example, you could say that I support Al-Qaeda's right to behead people or whatever. Like, you can say that legally. That's protected speech. What you can't do is coordinate with Al-Qaeda in order to push forward that propaganda. That's when it becomes material support for terrorism. There's no claim that Hamas, like, while it was, like, fending off this assault, was also, like, on the side, like, advising campus protesters, like, how to, like, and the history of the kind of Palestinian movement inside Gaza and the West Bank suggests that like they've never really done that. And there's been criticism of them for their absolute lack of outreach, them, the PLO, and others. And so even if it is the case that he was distributing this material, which doesn't seem to be the case, it would be okay, because obviously we quote Hamas, regularly in news reports.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with doing that, as long as we're not coordinating and materially supporting them.
Well, and Emily, I don't know, maybe what's the name of the Trump negotiator who went and was talking directly to Hamas? Is he materially supporting terrorism as well? I mean, it is a funny time for them to be pressing this case at a time when they're also making, I think, the correct point that, you got to talk to these people and you got to deal with them. And in his words, you may find out that they don't have horns coming out of their head. Maybe they're good guys.
The flyers in question, there's one of them that says something like "Crush Zionism," and it's a boot coming down the Star of David. But there are two others, and that one, by the way, is very explicitly anti-Zionist and not explicitly anti-Semitic, as the administration is implying. But of course, House Republicans and some Democrats passed a bill that said recently anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. So there's that overly broad question as well. But the other two flyers are legitimately, they look very, very bad. That if you have someone who is on a student visa who is handing out these types of flyers, you ask, well, how is somebody on a student visa this opposed to the United? Like, I think one of the things said the charter of the group that Khalil is a part of says something like they want to crush Western imperialism. So it's like, well, okay.
That appeared to be like an Instagram. Like it's a quote from somebody else, like some author said this, and somebody who handles their social media page made it one of their like little Instagram things. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if the organization like actually
endorses that
and said we advocate for the abolition of Western civilization. But if they did, that's a pretty far left kind of thing to say.
It is. Yeah. And it's protected speech, but I actually do think in principle there's a legitimate American interest in like bringing people or giving visas to people who actually are, displaying an interest in improving the United States and contributing to the United States and all of that. But I say that with a caveat that this is not a student visa. I think they thought they had a layup test case here with a student visa where they could make this argument. And we still don't have any pictures, video that I'm aware of, at least, of Khalil himself distributing this information and saying, for example, support Hamas. He was the one flyer is like a explanation. It's like Hamas's explanation of why they executed, as they say, Al-Aqsa flood on October 7th. And there's all kinds of context, hypothetically, whether or not, you think whether or not it looks like Khalil was engaged in this hypothetical scenario, but there's all types of context where you would say, we should study Hamas's explanation for what they did, for the terror that they wreaked. There's one that says something like, sometimes you need a flood. That was one of the other flyers, which is actually, I think that was pretty disgusting. But we don't actually know. The administration hasn't connected the dots as to whether or not he was endorsing these views and handing out these flyers. We just see the flyers. They're not really prosecuting this case very well.
Right, because they're doing it backwards, and there is a lot of speculation also that they are ginning up this controversy in order to satisfy the pro-Israel universe here in the United States, to soften them up, to then ram through a long-term truce and prisoner exchange that Israel will heavily object to. And that is a fairly standard kind of Trumpian move, to do something like outrageous and bellicose in a symbolic way to draw out a lot of anger and then cut the other way. You've seen it with Ukraine-Russia dynamic, repeatedly. So we'll see, because which would suggest that they don't really take anything they're saying seriously. That it's just kind of anti-Palestinian hostility, just manifest for the purpose of just throwing red meat to the pro-Israel lobby in order to then screw them over a couple weeks from now.
I mean, I think that's possible. I think also there's some rumblings in the base that like the mass deportation hasn't been as mass deportation-y as as was promised. So this is,
exactly.
high
and
profile.
Guantanamo is a good example of that. They don't get the mass deportation, so they get the spectacle of, oh, look, we're sending people to Guantanamo.
And the military planes and all of that sort of stuff. Then you also have, Trump just is, I think, has authoritarian instincts and likes the sense of power of just being able to do what he wants with who he wants, whenever he wants. He sees these pro-Palestine groups as being lefty activists that he hates anyway, so he gets to crush an enemy. And he sees universities writ large as training, breeding grounds for lefties, Marxists and socialists and, and
people
liberals.
Who vote against him.
People who vote against him. And so, as part and parcel of this comes at the same time that they just summarily stripped $400 million in funding from Columbia. 60 universities have gotten letters nationwide, including University of Virginia, where I went, public schools, private universities in red states and blue states, et cetera, saying basically you're next. Unless you can prove that you did everything we want on anti-Semitism, which if you read the letter, there's no way anyone could ever actually prove that they satisfied whatever it is that the administration is looking for. So, and I also think that they feel like, and I've seen a lot of conservatives say this, here's Democrats fighting again on an 80-20 issue, which I'm not sure that they're right about that polling, because I do think that people have a reaction against, assaults on free speech, et cetera. It depends on how you frame it. But I think that they also see it as a political winner, because they can say, oh, this guy's pro-Hamas. Why are you supporting people who are pro-terrorist, et cetera? So I think there's a whole bunch of reasons that cut toward in the direction of why the Trump administration would take this course. And none of that is to excuse it, though, because ultimately the impact of this, authoritarian crushing of speech, I think, comparable to things that we saw with McCarthyist Red Scare type of tactics, if not even more aggressive, that impact is very, very real and can't just be sort of waved away as Trump's just using this as a negotiating tactic.
Yeah,
McCarthy
and
was
we're
right.
likely to see more of it. Canary Mission, which kind of organizes, against students who protest on behalf of Palestine, has put out another list of people, and some of the offenses that those people are listed as having affected is going to the encampment, visiting it,
Wow.
That's it. They're not trying to claim anything more beyond that, and it's already having a chilling effect. There was a story that came into us just maybe a week ago. Some employees from a company that wanted to speak out about what was going on in there. After this happened, they're saying, you know what, actually, let's wait on this. I don't think we can speak out right now. And that's the goal here, to chill the ability of people to expose, wrongdoing and to speak out.
I want to get both of your take on how Democrats are handling this, because you guys were both sort of just talking about what type of maybe trap Republicans think they're putting Democrats in. So let's put E6 up on the screen. This is a response from Senator Chuck Schumer, who said, "I abhor many of the opinions and policies that Mahmoud Khalil holds and supports, and have made my criticism of the anti-Semitic actions at Columbia loudly known. Mr. Khalil is also a legal permanent resident here, and his wife, who's 8 months pregnant, is an American citizen." But he said, "This is a matter for the university to pursue, and I have encouraged them to be much more robust in how they combat anti-Semitism and maintain a harassment-free campus that protects the safety and security of Jewish and other students." That is really lukewarm. He calls on DHS to articulate the case against Khalil, basically. So both of you, maybe just starting with Ryan, what is your reaction to the way Schumer handled this?
He got a lot of criticism for, leading with, I abhor his speech, rather than free speech must be protected, particularly for speech that you abhor, because that's the whole point, right? We're not here we're not out here to defend the speech of people we agree with, like, and who are saying very civil milquetoast things like that. Nobody needs to defend that. You can say that in Saddam Hussein's Iraq. What you have to defend is the stuff that makes you tug at your collar a little bit and say, "Oh, wow, you can really say that." Well, I guess you can. Guess we have free speech here. Meanwhile, the Republicans are happy to elevate the Senate Judiciary Committee that just straight up said, "Free Mahmoud Khalil." So, like, the Democrats, just lose everywhere, because from the Republican perspective, they see Democrats as unapologetically, unconditionally standing up for a Hamas supporter. From the left, they see Schumer equivocating and like denouncing him before he gets around to defending him. So, you can kind of see from the Republican perspective why they think that they have a winning political moment here, even if what they're doing is unraveling what generations of Americans have fought for 250 years to uphold. But they might have a couple good weeks here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it remains to be seen, because it also does play into the accurate image of Trump as this just like authoritarian who throws his weight around and criminalizes speech and, is total hypocrite. And they ran on like, oh, we're going to be the free speech people, and then immediately like, and we're going to jail you for saying things that we didn't like at a rally. But, Chris Murphy, who has been pretty good in Trump 2.0, put out a good statement that led, Ryan, like you said, with bottom line, it doesn't really matter what he said and how you feel about it. That's not the point. The point is that we have free speech. And I don't think it's that hard to message that. The problem with Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, both of whom are the weakest, most pathetic leaders I have ever seen in my life, and both need to resign, in my personal, humble opinion, is the first thing you do is validate their frame. What's the Republican frame? He's an anti-Semite and a terrorist supporter. And the first words out of your mouth are to basically be like, they're right about him. Like, this is the idiocy of the Democratic Party in general. I mean, they did the same thing with immigration in the last election cycle. And I get immigration, tough issue, et cetera, but they thought they really had Republicans when they passed their own like hawkish border bill. Like, look, we're the real border hawks. No, you just gave credence to their framing of the world. You just helped to bolster the way that they view and they pitch immigration as the number one problem, and anarchy at the border and a flood and an invasion and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's what you're leading with. So no, I think it's foolish. I don't think it helps them politically. I think that the base of the Democratic Party, like, talk about misreading the moment between those two dudes, and then Gavin Newsom running around, giving massages to Charlie Kirk and Michael Savage and next Steve Bannon, et cetera. The base wants you to fight and be adversarial and push like a different frame of the world, not just constantly validate right-wing frames. And that's what Chuck Schumer, in addition to just being like weak and lame and taking 80 million years to even get to the freaking point, which is part of the problem too, you lead with validating their frame. You capitulate in the first paragraphs, and then you're done.
Yeah, and Schumer knows full well that a huge number of the protesters in that encampment were Jewish students themselves.
That's right.
So many, so they'd have seders every weekend.
Well, we can roll E7 actually, as Ryan makes this point.
Yeah, and of course it's true that there are a non-trivial number of Jewish students at Columbia University who feel like criticism of Israel or calling the attack on Gaza a genocide is anti-Semitic and makes them feel unsafe and is unpleasant and all those things. Like, those are genuine feelings. That doesn't change the fact that there are so many, Jewish students who disagree with them and are right there in the encampments. One of the few people who has acknowledged that in our politics is Donald Trump. He was did an interview with Hugh Hewitt, and I think at the moment Trump was particularly mad at Jewish voters because he was seeing polls that were showing that they were still voting for Democrats, even as he says, I gave them Jerusalem, I gave them the Golan Heights, and they're still voting for Democrats. And Hugh was complaining about the campus protests, and he says, Hugh, like, a lot of those kids out there are Jewish kids. You do realize that, right, Hugh? And he was like, yes, there's, there are a few outliers. He's like, no, there's a lot of them out there. Trump meant it as an insult. But Trump, like, understands that, and so does Schumer. And everybody who has looked at this understands it. And yet here we get this claim that it's anti-Semitic, despite if you listen to what Mahmoud Khalil would say on CNN and elsewhere, he would always say the liberation of the Jewish people and the liberation of the Palestinian people are entwined. Like we can only go forward in peace together to a place of equality and dignity, which is not Hamas rhetoric at all,
Right.
by the way.
Right. Right.
Yet
Well,
that was what he was saying.
and the last point I'll make on this is if it is the foreign policy priority of the U.S. to stop the spread of anti-Semitism, we are doing an absolutely dreadful job of it.
Yeah,
Because
Rubio should be deported if that's.
absolutely the case. Because that's the other thing is like, you know, the left is very careful. I think you may have made this point, somebody made this point recently. The left tends to be very careful to separate Israel from the Jewish people. And, you know, symbolic gatherings, such as the one that we just showed, of Jewish students who are anti-Zionist helps to prove that point. And that's part of why Jewish organizations who are anti-Zionist have been at the forefront of the pro-Palestine movement to make that point. The right constantly, led by Bibi Netanyahu, conflates the two. And Biden conflated the two, and Trump conflates the two. I mean, it's, you know, if you support Israel, you support Jews. And if you don't support Israel, you hate Jews. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
When Israel is out there cutting off electricity to a trapped population, trying to starve them and dehydrate them, you don't think that that is going to contribute to a spread of anti-Semitism here and around the world when you're the ones conflating? Conflating Israel and all Jewish people.
And the right also refuses to make any distinction between Hamas, civilians in Gaza, and campus protesters. Like anybody who is critical of Israel's conduct in the war is just pro-Hamas, flat out, no effort whatsoever to make any distinction.
I think that's a significant problem. Khalil is scheduled to appear in court today. We should add the battle is raging over where his case will be heard, whether in Louisiana or
his counsel's scheduled to appear. We've been trying to track flights out of that Louisiana prison. I don't think he's going to be there, but we'll see.
ABC News says he's scheduled to appear in court as of this morning, but
I very much hope he's there.
Yeah, we will see. So that's the story to watch today. Ryan, thank you so much for taking a slice of your very busy morning to help explain this to us.
You got it.
Good luck to you and to your kiddos, and certainly to your wife.
Appreciate it. Thank you for filling in. Much appreciated.
Oh, anytime.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.